This is What's Wild in New Hampshire by wildlife biologist Eric Orff. I am back at New Hampshire Audubon McLean Center with Diane Deluca. We're going to ask Diane, what's the history of Diane Deluca? What did you do? What were the projects you worked on? Well, I know one of them you and I worked on together. We'll reminisce about that a bit, but give us an introduction. How long you been working at Audubon, and how did you land the job at New Hampshire Audubon? Give us some history.
So I started at New Hampshire Audubon in the fall of 1987. And when I first started here, I was actually a joint position with the education department and what was then the wildlife department,
Okay.
which is now conservation science.
All right.
And it was like my dream job, really. I had come from working with seabirds on the coast of Maine
Okay.
and doing other bird projects, kind of internships all around the country.
Okay. Getting your foot in the door.
Yeah, and also teaching adults at the Audubon camp in Maine at the same time I was working with the seabird restoration project.
Okay.
So to be able to come to another organization and put those two pieces together was really wonderful.
So you've helped out in more than one state. New Hampshire for a long time, but you started out helping Maine with their shorebirds.
That's
Sounds
right.
like
That
cool.
was probably the start of my ornithology career.
Okay.
Was working with seabirds on islands off the coast of Maine. And the reason I got into that is that I was going to Cornell at the time.
Oh, Cornell Bird Lab.
And
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Steve Kress was also out of Cornell, and I got hooked up with him through the Lab of Ornithology and started working with him during the summers when I was a student there,
Nice.
an undergraduate student at Cornell.
Cool.
So
Tell us about some
very
projects
lucky.
you've worked on here.
So when I first started here, I was working with bald eagles and osprey, upland sandpipers, which were at the time found in two places in New Hampshire, one of which was the Pease Air Force Base. At the time
They're
it was
still there,
Pease
I
Air
think, aren't
Force
they?
Base.
Yep.
Now it's the Pease International Trade Port.
Yep.
And I was looking at populations of upland sandpipers that were in the infield,
Okay.
in between the runways.
Yep.
At the Pease Air Force Base. At the time it was still an Air Force base, so it was high security there.
Yep.
But we started looking at upland sandpipers, I think back in the late 1980s, and I did that for many years.
And that's
then,
about when we started the turns. Only I moved to the
Yeah.
Durham office for Fish and Game in 1988. December of 88, I arrived in Durham at the Region 3 office. Wasn't too long after that I got a call from you, I think, about can we go look at Great Bay and the rivers for terns?
That's correct. So I started watching terns back in the late 80s as well, and into the early 90s, and we started looking mostly in the salt marshes down in Hampton, which is
Found a few
where
there.
there were a few.
Yeah.
And there was also a very small colony in Great Bay, which you were...
How many nests? Do you remember?
Well, it varied a little bit, but there were somewhere usually between 12 and 20
Okay.
nests there.
I remember 8 was a pretty constant number, it seems like. We often
Yeah.
found 8.
Well, maybe we found 8 the years that you were there, but I remember as many as 20.
Okay. So this is
nests
Great
on
Bay, the Little Bay, and
Right, so it was Fox Point.
Fox Point.
There's
Yep.
a little island right
Yep,
off of Fox
yep.
Point there, where we used to
yeah.
follow that population. There may still be a few there. I
Yep,
don't
yep.
even know because I haven't been there in a long time. But it was a dwindling population. And so probably my favorite project here at New Hampshire Audubon, and also probably one of the projects that I was very passionate about because I came from doing seabird work on islands off the coast of Maine, which included puffins and terns, was to be involved in the start of tern restoration out at the Isles of Shoals. So we went.
I helped a little.
Yeah, and Eric was.
I remember taking everybody out to set up the decoys and the loudspeaker the first time.
Yeah, so we were fortunate enough to have Eric and his boat experience to get us out there, and also to get us through looking at terns in Great and Little Bay as well. Yeah. Much easier if you have a boat rather than try to take a canoe or something through all those channels. And so in the early 1990s, we started looking at the potential for doing tern restoration out at the Isles of Shoals. Historically, terns had nested out there in probably up into the late 20s, early 30s.
That far back, really?
Yeah, so it had been like 50 years or more since terns had actually nested on the coast of New Hampshire. Well, out at the Isles of Shoals, I should say, since it's split between Maine and New Hampshire. So there was a lot of excitement about the potential for doing tern restoration because they had successfully restored terns to a number of islands off the coast of Maine.
Okay.
And also they had tried it on the coast of Massachusetts as well.
Yep.
So it took a little while to kind of get all of that together to decide what island might have a potential to do it. Lunging Island had been the historical nesting site, but it's privately owned. White and Seavey Island were owned through the Coast Guard and the state of New Hampshire. So the thought was to try it there. And we did the first attempts back in 1997.
Okay.
Which included attraction techniques.
Yep.
So bringing decoys and sound system to make it seem like a tern colony.
I remember that day.
And we had committed to 3 years.
Okay.
With potentially not bringing terns in because it's a long-term project.
Right. Yep.
And in that first year, we were lucky enough to see tern response and tern interest in the island.
How many?
So by the end of the season, and so typically terns will start nesting. They'll be back in May.
Yep.
To look at the islands, to start setting up. I'd say right now, the terns that are out at the Isles of Shoals are setting up at the end of May.
Okay.
Some of them may even be laying eggs by then. You could see hatching happening by the second week in June.
Okay.
And we started seeing interest out there in June, and early July we actually got our first egg.
Okay. So
and
late.
Then from that we had 6 pairs that were interested in setting up nests, laying eggs.
That was the first year.
That was the first year.
Get out.
We never ever expected that we would get terns in that first year.
Wow.
So it was very exciting. And they hung in there. The last chicks actually didn't hatch until early September.
Wow.
And they stayed.
Yep. Wow.
So that was the first year, and it's grown exponentially since then. The colony continued to grow leaps and bounds. The second year, I think there were maybe 45 pair. Then that grew to, 145, and then it just took off from there.
Wow.
And now the tern colony out at the Isles of Shoals, which is still managed by people, is close to or over 3,000 pair.
Wow.
And
talk about a success.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Well, it's not
Thank
my
you.
success.
Well,
It's
you
a
helped.
team.
It
It's
was
a
a whole
team.
team, but who
Right.
led the way? You were the team leader,
Yeah.
as I
It
recall.
was a big team, which included, New Hampshire Fish and Game, Coastal Program, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. It's a big team.
Oh, yeah.
And we're lucky enough now to have 3 species of terns that nest on the
Wow.
coast of New Hampshire, including, over 3,000 pair of common terns. And it varies a little bit, but somewhere in the ballpark of 600 60 to 100 pair of roseate terns,
Wow.
which are an endangered species on the federal endangered species list,
Yep.
and 1 to 6 or 8 pair of Arctic terns.
Cool.
But more recently, it's been
Another
1 or 2
threatened
pairs.
species.
Another threatened species.
Yeah, wow.
But they're on the fringe of their
range
here.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So that is
Yeah.
probably,
Yeah.
that's my heart project. If a biologist is going to have a heart project where they're, you know, really passionate and the particular species that they're working with are just something that's near and dear to their heart.
Yeah.
That's my heart project.
Wow. Imagine that. What a run. What a great job.
And Eric was part of it, so that's even
I did
more
play a small
exciting.
part. I did. I had a good time. We were a good team. Yes, we were.
a great team and had so much fun. A lot of laughs on our trips through the bay.
And the turns diving. I have a picture somewhere. You holding the boat cushion over your head because the turns were.
Yeah, well, I definitely have some photos of all of that as well. So,
Yeah. Nice.
That was really fun.
So give us a day during that time. Do you remember a particular day, or maybe when you found the first egg, or
Yeah, I'll remember one day. If we're gonna, I mean, I've worked with other species and have had some really fun.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be terns.
Days.
Yeah.
But there is a turn day that probably stands out, and that was our first roseate pair.
Okay.
Which was, I believe, 2001, if I'm correct.
Okay.
And don't count on my memory being exactly correct, but it's
around there.
It's around there. We had our first roseate pair, which is really exciting. 1, because it's an endangered species. 2, because it had been 50 plus years since roseate terns had been on the coast of Maine. And 3, because they decided they would actually settle into our tern restoration colony. And they are attracted by common terns.
Yep.
So typically roseate terns nest in colonies where there are common terns. It gives them good protection.
Yep.
And this particular roseate, the first pair, set up in an area that was kind of visible from a blind.
Okay.
So typically, we had blinds set up all over the island so
Yep.
that we could monitor the terns, determine what the productivity was. And this roseate tern set up not far outside of one of the blinds that we were monitoring common terns.
Right.
And we knew that they were around hatching time, and I was in the blind watching. And I was watching this pair of roseates, and they're so spectacularly beautiful. You know, they have that pink blush during the breeding season, a dark bill. They're just a really beautiful bird. And I could tell that something was going on, and they were very attentive to the nest. And as they raised up, I could see that the egg was starting to pip. And they actually,
starting to hatch,
right in front of me, while I was watching from the blind, the first roseate tern pair in more than 50 years hatched an egg while I watched.
Wow.
And the egg cracked, the chick was visible. They were incredibly attentive. I'll never forget, both adults were there. They were kind of reaching down towards the chick. It was, you know, I don't want to be anthropomorphic about the birds, but it was
try
very
not to be,
tender.
but you can't help it.
You can't help it. It was a very tender moment.
Yeah.
They were really attentive. So that definitely stands out in my mind.
Wow, nice.
Never forget that day of having that opportunity to actually watch them hatch that chick.
So a very successful project. So from say 20 pairs of terns to 3,000+, and another species that hadn't nested here in 50 to 70 years. So and you've worked on other projects. I mean, Audubon, small staff, less than 20 or 15 folks. So you know, you mentioned the eagles you've worked on ospreys, and so it's all hands on deck some days. So
up in sandpipers. I've been really lucky to evolve. My career has kind of continued to evolve because I've had lots of opportunities here at New Hampshire Audubon.
Nice.
And most recently I've been working with pollinators
Yep.
and in
We're
the
gonna-
pollinator garden.
We're going to
and-
talk about that next.
Yeah.
So awesome work, Diane. Thank you very much. What an awesome career. Just capturing this for Women's History Month, which is March. But anyways, there's so many women that I've worked with during my 50-year career in New Hampshire that I thought it was time to capture some of this and have it for the record. So thank you very much, Diane. Awesome, awesome job. Thank you for
Thank you.
helping bring back the terns, the awesome terns. And I have used the terns diving to catch me stripers out in Great Bay. The terns have returned my favor 10 times over, 1,000 times over. So awesome, nice to see. Good job. Thank you very much. This is wildlife biologist Eric Orr for What's Wild in New Hampshire.